It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, folks, welcome in. Time for Herd Mentality. Lots of great questions to dive into. A lot of stuff on the offense. Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, 2024 expectations. Let's do it. First one comes from Justin, who says, I don't know what to think of this team. Is it a lack of talent? I really thought the 12 personnel stuff with Kincaid and Knox would be a big advantage. I expected more gadget stuff with Curtis Samuel. I had no expectations with Coleman and Hollins being highly productive. If you had the chance to move this offense forward, how would you do it? Would you make a trade for a wide receiver? What would you do offensively to get it going again? Wow, it's crazy how after 3 weeks we were so excited about this offense and what it can be, and then after the last two games, all the good graces have been evaporated, and now there's massive questions about the offense. So let's talk about it. I think, first of all, we're forgetting, and rightfully so after the first 3 games, we're forgetting how much new there is on this offense. 4 of the 5 wide receivers are new. Khalil Shakir is the only one that's ever played in a game with Josh Allen prior to this season. 2 different spots on the offensive line. You're working in Ray Davis to this running back rotation, and it's Joe Brady's first year as the full-time offensive coordinator. That's a lot of stuff, right? It's a lot of stuff that needs to come together. And because the first 3 weeks were what they were, it kind of makes it hard to digest the last 2 weeks, but I still think we got to let this play out a little bit. I think game scripts and matchups have been difficult the last 2 weeks. You look at both of these games, the Bills are down 3 scores for a good part of that Baltimore game early, and they're down 2 scores for most of the Houston game, 3 scores starting in the second half. And, I think obviously that makes it difficult for you to be what you're supposed to be offensively. Now, obviously you got to start faster, but I think game scripts and matchups really matter. I mean, Baltimore, their structure in terms of how the Bills matched up, you heard me talk about a lot of those concerns. And then this past week against Houston, situation where the Bills just didn't have the wide receiver talent on the outside to really take advantage of Houston's defensive structure. So there's plenty of questions. But in terms of this general productivity with the offense, there's a lot of players that aren't quite doing what a lot of people expected them to do. I think part of it is the Bills aren't running many plays. Josh Norris pointed out on Tuesday on Twitter that the Bills in 2023 ran the 4th most plays per game, 66.3 on average. This year they are 31st, 55.8 plays per game. That's a notable downtick. You're down, 11 plays per game on average? That's tough, right? That's production that's missing. And I think it's fair to ask yourself, well, why? Why are the Bills running less plays? Well, they're not as good on third down. The Bills are only 32% on third down right now, 25th in the NFL. It's not a place where they typically are. They're just not being efficient with their offense. And your comment about Curtis Samuel, you thought that he would be more of a gadget player for this offense. I think my exception is that he's only been a gadget player, and I think he's capable of doing a lot more. For whatever reason, that chemistry isn't there. And I think that's been evident across really all the weapons where there's been chemistry issues with Keon Coleman, with Mack Hollins, with Marquez Valdes-Scantling, with Curtis Samuel. It's just not there right now. And again, there's a lot of new pieces to be worked into this offense. And maybe it was silly for us to think that 5 weeks into the season that everything would be humming, and it probably is going to take some time. Remember Tom Brady, his year with Tampa Bay, they were 7-5. All the questions in the world, is this offense going to come together? Well, eventually it did. And so that's why I think there's a time element. We got to let this kind of expand and play out and really get more of a feel for what's going on. I think you could see some of the warts for sure. But, I don't think it's a situation where you bury the whole thing. I think there's a lot of very crazy overreaction right now. So comments on Kincaid and Knox. I think it's fair to say that duo hasn't necessarily been the pass-catching dynamic duo that we had hoped and were, kind of pitched from the team, and you thought about 12 personnel and the advantages. Yeah, we certainly haven't seen that come together. Last year, Kincaid's a rookie. Kincaid misses a game with concussion. Knox had the broken wrist, so he kind of chalked it up to some of that. But this year, kind of coming into it, you felt like that was the mainstay, right? That was the thing carrying over year that you felt you could really build upon, and that certainly hasn't happened to this point. Now they're both playing a lot of snaps. There's no question about that, but you're not watching the Bills right now and feeling like, man, this tight end duo is a big part of why they're going to be successful in terms of the both of them, right? Especially Dawson Knox, just not seeing much at all there in terms of production, and that's the guy that's been the longest tenured player with Josh Allen. And so incorporating him into the mix is certainly not happening at this point in time. I think at the same time, Dalton Kincaid, he's on pace for 80 targets through 5 games in an offense that is inefficient, that's missing 10, 11 plays per game right now. So I'm curious to see how that evolves throughout the course of the season. There's still 12 games to play, folks, here during the regular season. And so the last part of the question here from Justin is, what would I do? What would I do for this offense? There's 4 things that I think would make a lot of sense to me to get it going. I think, first of all, trading for Amari Cooper. That's the name at wide receiver that's appealing to me. I love the skill set. I like the player, and it's super manageable to bring him on. Not a ton of cap space required, and that's going to be important for the Bills, who are very tight on space. You can't go after a receiver that's going to, be expensive. You don't have the wiggle room. The cap is real. And so Amari Cooper, I think at most, is about $1.2 million to onboard. I'd be very interested in doing that. And certainly, Cleveland looks like a dumpster fire. Deshaun Watson stinks, and it makes a lot of sense. They've already made that contract very tradable. I think if you offer them a 4th-round pick, that probably gets the deal done, and I'd probably do that if I were Brandon Beane. So that's step 1. I think step 2 is you got to figure out your first down play calling. You can't be so run aggressive on first down. The Bills against Houston, they ran the ball 19 of 25 first down plays. Like, everybody knows the Bills are running the ball on first down, and that makes it difficult to be good at running the ball when everybody knows that you're going to run the ball. And then also not mixing in the pass in those situations takes away from the volume of passing that exists in this offense. So you got to rework your first down play calling. Why are you 32% on third down? Well, you're in 3rd and long all the time. Why is that the case? Well, your first down play calling stinks. Then I would solidify protection plans. I think this is a very big deal for this Bills offense. The protection schemes are just not working. And it's not that they have bad protection schemes. It just doesn't feel like everyone's synced up. If there's pressure coming, if there's blitzers, they don't respond to it. They just let it happen and then hope that Josh Allen figures it out. There has to be a better protection plan on passing downs, and they get fooled a ton. And so they got to get that figured out. And then lastly, I would say to my quarterback, Josh Allen, man, don't get bored with the short stuff. Make sure that we're doing the efficient things in the passing game. Unfortunately, we haven't given you the down the field wide receiver talent for you to be targeting receivers down the field in terms of 20 yards or more down the field at the 2nd highest rate of any player in the NFL. You don't have those players, man. You've got to lean into the quick, efficient passing game that made you successful weeks 1 through 3, because unfortunately, the makeup of this roster doesn't lend itself favorably to being able to throw the ball down the field a ton. And so that's what I would do. Trade for Amari Cooper, figure out my first down play calling, solidify our protection plans, and remind Josh Allen that we don't have good vertical receiving talent. And you don't have chemistry with those players, and take the quick, easy stuff. Do the smart, right thing with the ball. And when you do that, the Bills are very, very difficult to defend. Next one from Jason. Jason says, I know you want more play action from Joe Brady, and given their commitment to the run game and wide receiver struggles to separate, it seems obvious that it would be helpful. Bottom line, Can you think of any defensible reason as to why he wouldn't call it more? Well, let's start by acknowledging that over the last 2 games, it hasn't been effective. The last 2 games, Josh Allen on play action passes, 6 of 12 for 30 yards. That's it. I mean, so it has been called and it hasn't worked. So it's not like it was working and they got away from it. It wasn't working over the last 2 games. And I think there's a number of reasons why. I think, first of all, game scripts. I already mentioned it. They were down in both of those games, which I think takes away from your play action game, but also pass protection. When you're having issues protecting your quarterback, deeper drops where your quarterback turns his back to the defense, it's not necessarily the best idea. And so I think that goes hand in hand. Game scripts, we're not protecting well, and asking our quarterback to turn his back to the defense to execute a play fake might not be the best idea. And so, that I'm a champion for play action. I want it. I love it. It's important. Josh Allen's great at it. But maybe these circumstances aren't the most appealing to run it at the frequency that I'm looking for, which is about 30%. All right, folks, tons more to get to here. All right, we'll talk wide receiver room. And I know there's a lot of commentary about there for Sean McDermott and his status with the team. So I'll comment on that here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports platform with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so that way your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. And Prize Picks puts their members first, so withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get money in as quick as 15 minutes. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, plenty of wide receiver and Sean McDermott conversation coming up right now. Next one from Ben. Ben says, at this point in the season, which rostered receiver has the biggest upside? Based on the Keon Coleman mistakes you pointed out, is that why Mack Hollins is still getting more action? Also curious how Keon compares to Mack in run blocking. Where do you think trust levels are at between Josh and his ex-receivers? When do the Bills give Keon the keys to the car and let him take his lumps full time? Yeah, so it's interesting. You're seeing the consequence of playing a lot of young players, right? Keon Coleman with some route running blunders that were pretty evident. Cole Bishop, boy, that wasn't tough to see, right? I mean, it's just like you play these young players and you want to see them, you want them to be awesome, but there are lumps that you got to take when you play these rookies. So let's kind of get into your question here. The rostered receiver with the biggest upside is Khalil Shakir. Khalil Shakir is the most important wide receiver on this football team. I think he's the most important offensive weapon on this football team. He's the guy that can get buckets. He's the guy that can get open and catch the ball and win with the ball in his hands. He's the style of receiver that I like. You've heard me talk receivers for years on this podcast. I want guys that have separation quickness, that can present an available target with consistency, that can create space for themselves. Who's the guy in this arsenal of weapons that can do that? It's Khalil Shakir. And boy, he's got this alpha mentality and this competitive spirit that is impossible to not love. So Khalil Shakir is certainly that guy for me. Mack Hollins has been very good as a run blocker. I think there's been some variance with his targets, particularly down the field, that I think rightfully would frustrate a lot of people. But I think he's done a lot of the little things that are important, whether it is run blocking, getting down the field and making blocks. The touchdown run for James Cook against Jacksonville, he acted like he was going to catch a ball, which took a defender to him and vacated space for James Cook to be able to run in a touchdown. He does all those little things. He's been very good on special teams. So he's a very useful player. But I understand some of the frustrations when targeting him. It's been inconsistent, and it just doesn't feel like him and Josh have the chemistry right now for them to be very consistent with their opportunities down the field. But Mack Hollins and Keon Coleman are both playing a lot. Coleman has played 64% of snaps, and that includes whichever game it was that he was benched for the first quarter and didn't play much at all in the second half because the Bills were so far ahead. I think that was Jacksonville. And then Mack Hollins is playing 63%. So there's snaps for both of them. They're both getting a lot of opportunity. And I think the trust is pretty evident from Josh Allen. In fact, I'd say probably too much trust. Go back to that end of game sequence against Houston, and first down, it's a back shoulder throw to Keon Coleman. Second down's a stutter go to Mack Hollins down the field. Yeah, he trusts them. They're just not on the same page. So I don't think that's really an issue. So yeah, more Khalil Shakir. There's snaps for both Hollins and Coleman. If you're going to take away snaps from any receiver, MVS is the guy that's probably playing too much. I mean, even Tyrell Shavers was called off the practice squad for this Houston game, and he got a fair amount of run. He's on the field in that end of game sequence as one of the guys in the lineup. So yeah, I think there's some questions about how they can sprinkle in their wide receiver talent differently. But I think Coleman and Hollins are both getting plenty of run. Matthew says the last two games have not been good. In the last two games, things aren't clicking for the offense, specifically the passing game, and big plays are being given up by the defense. A lot of Bills fans are panicking right now and calling for Sean McDermott's head. I, for one, am not doing that. I feel like every single year the Bills go through a few games of bad play. Last year it was the Patriots and Jaguars. The year before it was the Jets and Vikings. The year before it was the Jaguars and Colts. I think this is just a normal phase of an NFL season. And it's also the cost of getting younger and cheaper. It's a reset year, and if the Bills want to be a viable team for the long term, this had to happen. That being said, McDermott is the coach. That being said, McDermott is the coach to coach younger and cheaper players up. McDermott, year after year, has proven he can make adjustments throughout the year to get the teams so they are winning again. Bills fans need to remember this. I just hope Brandon Beane stays the course and doesn't flinch and trade for someone the Bills just can't afford. Would like to hear your thoughts. So there's going to be two more questions about Sean McDermott. So we'll get into all the different McDermott pieces throughout the next few questions. For this one, I do want to talk about lulls specifically because that has absolutely been characteristic of Sean McDermott coach teams. And I think a lot of teams, right, they kind of have these moments every year where it's just they're not playing to their standards. So it's not unique to Sean McDermott. I think this happens for pretty much any good team, right? Remember all the years with Brady and Belichick, and everyone was like, oh, is this the year it's over? No, it really never is. I mean, the Chiefs last year had the 15th scoring offense, certainly took their lumps. And it's just about playing your best football when it matters most. And lulls are inevitable. And you wish it wasn't true. Like, I get it. You don't want it to be true. But you have to ask yourself what's normal, right? It's more normal to have lulls than it is to be amazing for every single game that you go out and play. But I would like to call out the lulls. You highlighted some of them going back to last year. The Bills were 6-6, and they finished 11-6 in 2023 to be the number 2 seed in the AFC. In 2020, I mean, you remember the conversations we had last year. I mean, that stretch of games against the Broncos, wasn't coming to me. The Eagles, there was a rough stretch in there. So they go 6-6. They finish 11-6 in 2023 to be the 2 seed. In 2022, yeah, you mentioned the back-to-back losses to the Jets and Vikings. The Vikings, one of the most embarrassing losses I've ever seen in the history of my life. They get to 6-3. They won the last 7. Go back to 2021. They were 7-6. They had the Jaguars loss to that horrible team. They finished 11-6 in 2021. 2020, congratulations. The Bills had no lulls. They were 13-3. They were awesome. They lost in the AFC Championship game. 2019, they lost 3 of their last 4 entering the playoffs. 2017, the Bills were 5-2. They dropped 4 of 5 to fall to 6-6, and then they backdoor into the playoffs. Like, this has been an unfortunate norm under McDermott. So, yeah, I'm hopeful that this is the lull and we're getting it out of the way right now, and the Bills are getting ready to go smoke the Jets on Monday Night Football and then beat the Titans and Seahawks. And, it's certainly possible. I think the schedule is quite favorable the rest of the way. It doesn't quite look as daunting as maybe it did at the beginning of the season. So, yeah, these lulls unfortunately are pretty normal, and let's hope that's what this is, and the Bills wake up real soon. Rob says, unfortunately, after the fourth quarter decisions and another loss, that McDermott is taking Unfortunately, after the fourth quarter decisions and another loss that McDermott is taking the heat and ownership for the poor decision-making, my friends and I are back to pondering the question we have been asking too many times. Is Sean McDermott one of the worst good coaches in the NFL or one of the best bad coaches? Obviously, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, and I generally like Sean, and I think his record and winning percentage speak for themselves, but I wanted to ask you, where do you rank Sean McDermott amongst the 32 head coaches? I know with your other podcasts, you scout the whole NFL and rank every starter at every position, so if you had to rank Sean McDermott, is he league average, or would you put him at a higher tier? Well, we rank coaches as well, so you're in luck here. So let me get into this. I understand that there are people that are upset with Sean McDermott. I've given him plenty of criticism. And if you listen to me the last 2 weeks, I've extended a lot of that to Sean McDermott. He's responsible for the end of game. He's the head coach. He's responsible for all of it. And let me reiterate something that I think is important, and that end of game sequence. I don't care that the Bills passed the ball. I'm fine with that. You needed a first down. You had to get a first down. That's what you had to do. And you could certainly convince me that the best way to get a first down is to ask Josh Allen to throw the ball, right? Like, I'm totally good with that. It's how they threw the ball that made me upset. A back shoulder throw to Keon Coleman, a stutter go to Mack Hollins on first and second down, when you had other options on those plays that were better options, that were open and available. Whose choice was it to throw that ball? Now, Sean McDermott's responsible for everything, and he should have said to Josh Allen, let's be efficient here, get the first down, and let's get to overtime. Yeah, he should have said that, and I'm sure he did. Who in that critical moment made the choice to throw that ridiculous back shoulder to Keon Coleman when he wasn't open, and the stutter go, which is a low-efficiency play to Mack Hollins down the field when you had other guys open? Who made that choice? Probably Josh Allen. Did Josh Allen go YOLO there and say, hey, I'm going to rip the ball down the field and I'm going to be the hero here? Maybe he did. You heard you saw Sean McDermott mouth on the sideline, we just need a first down, right? I think we need to be open to the idea that Josh Allen decided to rip the ball down the field when he didn't need to and shouldn't have. And if your counterpoint is, well, then there shouldn't have been vertical options, that's not a real counterpoint. You need to have different routes available to lift coverage and make space for other players. It's not like you just, well, we're afraid Josh Allen's going to throw the ball down the field so no routes can be vertical. That's not how it works. You have to make the smart decision with the football. But again, it's Sean McDermott's responsible because he's the head coach. He's the head coach. But who really threw the ball down the field? When you can't throw down the ball down the field, you're 4 of 20, throwing the ball down the field 20-plus yards all season long. You're going to do the thing you're the worst at when you didn't need to in a critical part of the game. Silly. And I'm not making excuses for Sean McDermott, but game management issues are problematic all the time for coaches. All the time. And I know you expect more. It's year 8. But you have to ask yourself, what's normal? Normal is that coaches screw things up at the end of games all the time. Google Andy Reid and game management. You'll spend the rest of your day reading about that. Look at what Zach Taylor did against the Ravens on Sunday, running the ball 3 times and settling for a long field goal when Joe Burrow's carving up the Ravens all season long. It's part of football. Like, you got to watch other football and see what normal is. And you will see that these types of ridiculous coaching moments happen all the time. Nick Sirianni's been blowing it all year for the Eagles. Like, and everybody loves Nick Sirianni or loved him before that team fell apart last year. Back to your question. I had Sean McDermott entering the season ranked 7th in the NFL among head coaches. And that's probably where it'd still be for me right now. And going into the season, some other notable things here. Brett Whitefield, my co-host for First Read, who's not a Bills fan, ranked Sean McDermott top 10. Kyle Krabs, a Dolphins fan, had Sean McDermott ranked top 10. CBS had him ranked 7th. PFF had him ranked 10th. And the NFLPA, the players in the NFL, he was ranked 7th and received a grade of A. So, I think Sean McDermott's a top 10 NFL head coach. I think he's towards the bottom of the top 10, but I think he's a pretty decent NFL head coach, but he certainly has frustrating things, just like any person has strengths and weaknesses of their job. And I think I think player development, culture, leadership has been very good for Sean McDermott. Has he had end-of-game blunders? Yeah, it's disappointing. It's frustrating. I'm concerned when the next one's going to be. I'm concerned that it's going to happen in the playoffs. Like, I get all that stuff. But unfortunately, like, coaching blunders are just a very unfortunate, disappointing part of what's normal in the NFL. Like, don't underestimate people's ability to be bad at their jobs, especially in a high-stakes moment. And you want better. Like, I get it. But across the history of the NFL, even for the best coaches, like, there are pretty regular game management blunders. Again, I'm not making excuses. I'm trying to let you know what's normal. All right, we got more McDermott. We got some Brandon Beane stuff here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it more wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and a brand new documentary style course on Marxism, socialism, and communism. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register, hillsdale.edu/lockedon. All right, I think we got one more McDermott question, and I think there's some important stuff to get into here. Peter says, has 2024 become a referendum on McDermott? Practically, what is the minimum Bills have to do for him to keep his job? Predictively, I don't think that Terry Pagula is even thinking about firing Sean McDermott. I think the fallout would have to be massive for this decision to be made. And let me remind you of Terry Pagula's head coach hiring history. It's pretty deep and it's pretty bad. Became the Sabres owner in 2011, fired Lindy Ruff in 2013, who he's since rehired. Then he hires Ron Rolston, who was fired after 51 games, Dan Bilsma, Phil Housley, Ralph Kruger, Don Granato, Rex Ryan, Sean McDermott. He's literally only gotten one right. That's it. So you fire your coach if you think you can get a better one. I don't really have a lot of confidence in the Bills being able to do that, particularly with Terry Pagula being the one signing off on that decision. What coaches out there get you excited that you think would be better than Sean McDermott? Bill Belichick? Please. You seen this guy without Tom Brady? He stinks. Mike Vrabel? Boy, you want to talk about going backwards in terms of philosophical approach to playing the game of football. Ben Johnson? I'm over Ben Johnson, folks, and I was early on really liking him as an offensive coordinator. But when his head coaching candidacy started to heat up, I had a couple different people tell me that Ben Johnson's not really interested in being an NFL head coach, and then he's proceeded to turn down many opportunities. Respectfully, I don't really want that guy to be my head coach. Like, if you don't have a burning desire to be that, it's such a high-profile, important job. What's going to happen when a little adversity hits and you're like, man, I never really wanted to do this in the first place? So, like, miss me with Ben Johnson, too. So I don't know what names are out there. Like, it feels like people just want to change for the sake of change when there's plenty of concerns that could actually be better, especially when the guy making that decision has a terrible history of making those choices. So, like, I understand the McDermott people out there that want him fired yesterday. I hear you. I understand your frustrations. I wish I had a path forward that made sense to me. That made more sense to me than staying the course with Sean McDermott. And again, predictively, I don't think there's a chance this happens anyways, because I think that Terry Pagula's got much bigger problems than Sean McDermott, who's been wildly successful as the Bills head coach. and especially when his resume is what it is. Evan says, with the recent struggles, how much of the blame do you think can be placed on Beane and the roster construction? I see people saying Beane should get some of the blame for not putting together a team with enough game breakers, but to me, I think it mostly comes down to coaching. Game plans lately have been rough, to say the least. I think Beane has done a good job putting his team together, especially consider the Diggs situation and all the dead cap. Just look at the 2022 draft. Yeah, I mean, I think the Bills had a bad defensive game plan against the Ravens, and I think they had a good offensive game plan against Houston. They just didn't necessarily have the players to execute it. So I guess that makes it a bad game plan. But, like, are we sure? Are we sure that this is, like, as ridiculous of a situation as some people are painting it to be? The Bills are awesome for 3 games. They got smoked by the Ravens because their defensive game plan was bad, and they lost to Houston because they didn't have the players on offense to take advantage of what Houston was doing, and certainly didn't manage the end of the game. Like, are we overreacting? Can we let this play out? As for Beane, I think his free agent class is looking bad, and obviously the Bills were very limited with resources, and so they were able to bring in Curtis Samuel, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mike Edwards. Those are not looking like good signings right now. Austin Johnson feels fine to me as a depth defensive tackle. Dwan Smoot, I think, is going to be fine as a rotational defensive end. You have Mack Hollins, who I think brings an X factor, but not necessarily a player you want featured heavily in your offense. And then Nicholas Moreau. Not a lot to show there, right? At least through the first 5 games of the season. I don't think he made any mistakes on the players that he said goodbye to. Jordan Poyer's been objectively bad for Miami. Trey White was a healthy scratch after being objectively bad for the Rams. Gabe Davis continues to be exactly who Gabe Davis has always been, which is not worth his contract. Then Mitch Morse. And, maybe Mitch Morse would be a benefit to the team right now for his help with protection. But I don't really feel like, when I consider why are the Bills 3-2 and had the last 2 games that they had, I don't know that not having Mitch Morse and having Connor McGovern instead is much of a leading factor. I think we have to remember that the Diggs trade was definitely not part of his blueprint for the offseason. It 1,000,000% was not. I think he got backed into a corner and he had to do it. And I think that matters. Like, we talked about the needed receiver with the expectation that Diggs was going to be on the team. And then they had to trade him because they were backed into a corner. Like, it's pretty obvious the Bills didn't have a path forward with Diggs. They did what they had to do, but, like, let's not act like that's nothing in the overall plan that Brandon Beane had for this roster. The biggest question people have is wide receiver. Well, they're paying Stefon Diggs over $30 million. They're accounting it first, at least they're accounting for over $30 million in cap space to not have Stefon Diggs. Obviously that hurts because you still have the hole at receiver and then you don't have that money to help your team elsewhere. So that's a big part of this. So I think if I had criticism for Brandon Beane, I wish that his free agent class was better. I know that his resources were limited. And it's not like any of those players were counted on for like overly prominent roles. Those are all very much fill in the blanks players. But I would have had different skill sets in mind at wide receiver. That's what I mean, you know me, I want separation guys. And he went out and got a bunch of big bodied contested catch players and then Curtis Samuel, who they can't figure out how to use. So my investments at wide receiver would have been different. That's what I would say. But again, I think there's a massive riding of the roller coaster right now, and we need to pump the brakes and let things play out a little bit. It's week 5, folks. All right, we got one more here from Alex. Alex says, got a herd mentality question for you. Do you get the sense that expectations are shifting both within the fan base and national media of what 2024 is for the Bills? My perspective has always been that 2024 is a rebuild year. This began with cutting the dead weight of old and expensive contracts, then identifying the core talent to extend, and then adding 1 to 2 premium assets during next offseason for a 2025 push, likely a wide receiver and a defensive end. Seems the fan base and national media are forgetting we traded down to accumulate more 2025 draft capital, and we're carrying the dead cap of a premium wide receiver, which makes trading for another wide receiver very challenging. Personally, any Davante Adams trade talk is a step backwards on this journey, which is otherwise working despite 2 bad results. Either way, I'm always happy to hear your perspective. Go Bills. Look, I think you're trying to do both. I think you're trying to transition, get younger and cheaper, and set your foundation moving forward, but you're also trying to win. Now, it is a transitional year. There's no question about that. And that has impacted my expectations. And I said that going into the season. I expected the Bills to win 10 or 11 games. I thought that'd still be good enough to win the AFC East. But what's different for me about my expectations for the Bills compared to the previous 3-4 seasons was I thought the Bills could go on a deep postseason run the last several years. I think the Bills can be the 4th seed in the AFC, host a playoff game, and then we'll see. My expectations for the deep postseason run are less. I still expect them to get there. I expect them to win the division, but I'm not sitting here saying, wow, I think this team is definitely a Super Bowl contender. I think they certainly can be, but it's a transitional year, which took away from some of my belief in a deep postseason run. So I think the Bills are kind of on schedule. And again, I think what tempers things, what changes things is that for 3 games, this team was everything you hope they could be. And then they hit some bumps in the road, and we'll see how they respond. We'll see. Plenty of games left for this season to define itself. And there's been 5 games. 3 have been good. 2 have been bad. We'll see what happens the rest of the way. Let's let them all play out and see what happens. A lot of overreaction, I think. I'm hopeful that we look back at this in a few weeks and say, man, that was tough. That was tough that we went through that, but we didn't have the right perspective. And, I get the conversation. I get it. But it's also crazy to me that it feels like the NFL, it's like you win and everything's amazing. You lose and it's like fire everybody. Everything's bad. It's a wild roller coaster that I try my best not to ride. And hopefully this conversation today was helpful in you gaining useful perspective for you to calibrate your expectations moving forward for the Buffalo Bills. All right, folks, moving on here on this podcast, we're going to get to crossover Thursday. Start getting ready for this Jets game on Monday Night Football. My primer on Friday, and then the Bills play Monday night. So we'll get you the final thoughts, predictions, injury stuff over the weekend. So plenty of content. Make sure you don't miss anything. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, share, and subscribe. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. Look forward to catching up with you again real soon.